It's time to face the reality. There's some players who have been great for fantasy, but they're not going to be this year. We're going to explain why and give you some names of players you might want to grab instead.
If you can't wait to start drafting fantasy football teams, you don't have to. Underdog Fantasy has drafts with entry fees as low as $4 and prize pools up to $15 million. And of course, their flagship Best Ball Mania 5, where someone will win over $1 million. Plus, if you sign up and use promo code ENDGAME, you'll get a special pick that you can use to potentially win 325 times your entry. And you're going to get up to $250 in bonus cash. Don't wait. Go join Underdog Fantasy now and use promo code ENDGAME to get your special pick and cash.
All right, it may sound harsh, but some of these players are going to be irrelevant for fantasy. So let's start, Chris. Who's the first player you're avoiding, and who do you prefer instead?
I'm avoiding DeAndre Hopkins. I just don't see how DeAndre Hopkins is still going to be fantasy relevant this year. Even last year, you look at it in Tennessee, he only finished as a top 24 wide receiver in 6 games all year, and he was outside the top 36 wide receivers in 9 games. And that was while getting a 28% target share, which was the 12th most in the entire NFL. So it wasn't like he wasn't getting the targets. The targets were there for him. And now going into this year, he's got to compete with Calvin Ridley for targets. He's not just going to be the only guy there. Remember, they had nobody last year. Treylon Burks never got going. I don't know, Nick Westbrook-Akine, was he the number 2 wide receiver? Chico Conco, I don't even really know. Now he's not going to be the number 1. At best, he's going to be like the 1B or 1A with Calvin Ridley there. Calvin Ridley's younger. New head coach Brian Callahan went out and got Calvin Ridley. He wanted Calvin Ridley. So we're going to likely see DeAndre Hopkins' target share drop way down. And he was already barely relevant last year as it was. With this new situation with Calvin Ridley, with the loss of target share, I don't see how he's going to be relevant this year. Yeah, he'll probably have a game or two where he scores a touchdown or randomly goes for 100 yards, but is that really relevant in fantasy? Not really. But you know who I think is going to be more than relevant in fantasy? In fact, I think he's going to be great in fantasy, is Deontay Johnson, who somehow is going 6 picks after DeAndre Hopkins. Why? He's the clear number 1 wide receiver in this Carolina offense. An offense that I think is going to surprise people, especially in the passing game. I've talked about Deontay Johnson a ton. I'm not going to go on about him again here. Watch, half of our videos and you'll hear me talk about Deontay Johnson. But why would I take DeAndre Hopkins, who's going to be 32 years old this year, competing with Calvin Ridley for targets in this Titans offense, when I can get Deontay Johnson, the clear number 1 wide receiver in Carolina, who's still in his prime, and I get him 6 picks later.
All right, I'm going to go with a veteran receiver, another big body guy who hasn't even ever been an elite wideout for fantasy. I don't get why Mike Williams is still on the fantasy radar. Look, I honestly have too many reasons not to draft him. I don't know if I have time to go over all of them in detail, but here's a few. All right, let's start with the very obvious, coming off a season-ending injury. You know, with ACL, it takes time, right? Especially for a guy at a skill position like that. He's probably not going to even be 100% of whatever he was before last year. And then let's look back at the fact that, has Mike Williams ever really been a stud for fantasy? He's had 2 1,000-yard seasons out of the 7 that he has played. And, he's been in some really pass-heavy offenses. And he's been catching passes from Phillip Rivers back in the day, from Justin Herbert. And now he's going to an offense in the Jets that will probably be one of the least pass-heavy in the league. This team has a great running game with Breece Hall. This team has an improved offensive line, a great defense, a defensive-minded coach. And honestly, I'm also, I guess this is reason number 3, not too convinced that Aaron Rodgers can support an elite wideout outside of just maybe Garrett Wilson. Now look, Aaron Rodgers 5 years ago, yeah, sure, great. That's an instant upgrade over any QB in the league probably. But is it really at this point better than Justin Herbert? Justin Herbert's got a strong arm. He's young. He's dynamic. Aaron Rodgers is lucky just to be on the field at this point in his career. We don't know what he's going to look like in a Jets uniform, and I just don't feel like he's going to support a high-end receiver outside of Wilson, who is much younger, is just flat out better than Mike Williams, even in his peak. But I just don't see enough targets going around. I'm worried about all of these things for Williams as far as just even being out there, being effective. He's a guy who's a big play threat in the past, 15.6 yards per reception for his career. I don't see that happening here. Not enough big plays in this offense with this version of Aaron Rodgers, with this version of Mike Williams. So guess what? I would prefer an actual deep threat. Another Williams, Jameson Williams. You probably have to get him a little bit earlier than Mike Williams. It will definitely be worth it. Mike Williams is basically on my do not draft list. Jameson Williams, the more and more I look at it, could be a steal this year. Not much expected out of him. Look, in the games that he did play last year after the suspension, he actually provided some pop once in a while. He has 15 yards per reception. He can give you those big plays. His target share did ramp up toward the end of the season, and in the playoffs, I think we're going to see a much more involved Jameson Williams this year. So I would definitely rather take him over a guy who used to be considered a valuable receiver. And another veteran receiver you just don't think is going to cut it anymore.
Yeah, it's been a nice run for Tyler Lockett. He's been one of these fantasy guys, kind of like a fantasy value almost every year, but now I think he's just going to be fantasy irrelevant, to be honest. I mean, even last year, I talked about it with D-Hop. Tyler Lockett also only had 6 games where he finished as a top 24 wide receiver, was the wide receiver 37 in points per game, so was barely even relevant last year. He's also 32. I mean, he's technically 31 right now, but he's going to be turning 32 in September. So basically at the start of the season, he will be 32. And we got a whole new coaching staff here. We don't know how they're going to use him like the way Pete Carroll and that staff did. Are they going to look to him, or are they going to look to the younger wide receiver that they drafted in the first round? Now, I know this coaching staff didn't draft Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round last year, but he was the number 1 wide receiver off the board last year, and we saw it down the stretch. He started to get more involved. I got to think that they're going to probably want to prioritize JSN over Tyler Lockett, who looks like his days as a fantasy wide receiver, as even a good NFL wide receiver, are probably coming to an end. But look, if you want to take some shots on some boom bust, late round kind of upside guys like Tyler Lockett, why not just take Rashid Shaheed? He goes a little bit after Tyler Lockett, and they feel very similar. Like, we're talking about guys that not going to be consistent high floor players, but they have those spike weeks, those big weeks. But unlike Tyler Lockett, Rashid Shaheed is still very young, entering his year 3, so that's great for a wide receiver. But also, unlike Tyler Lockett, he's the clear number 2 wide receiver here behind Chris Olave. There's nobody else that he's competing with for targets here. So if you're looking for that kind of boom bust upside in the late rounds, which is what you should be looking for in your late rounds, don't get Tyler Lockett. I think those days are gone for him, but I think those days are still ahead for Rashid Shaheed. I think he's one of my favorite late round sleepers this year. I'm going to pass on Lockett and just take Shaheed instead.
Well, when it comes to a big name player, a guy who was the number 1 running back for all of fantasy a couple of years ago, Austin Eckler, there's basically 2 sides this year. There are the apologists, he was banged up, it was just a bad season, the coach and all this stuff, and he just needs a fresh start. And then there are the realists, those of us who, we love Austin Eckler, right? And I say we, not just us personally, but the fantasy community. He's one of us, right? He loves fantasy football. He talks about it. Great guy. I mean, look, I love Austin Eckler, but I am not drafting him. Because let's face it, the Chargers let him go for a reason, and he even spelled it out. He said in one of his podcasts, they want a guy who's going to carry the ball 300 times, right? They want to have this ground pound offense, and he's not that type of player anymore. At least he doesn't want to be that type of player. This is a veteran running back who's taken a beating, and so he's going to go to a situation in Washington where he's going to be sharing time with Brian Robinson. Look, that's fine. That does, serve some purpose, I guess, if you want a late round back, somebody who can get you some touches. But let's face it, there's plenty of guys who are in very similar situations, some sort of a committee here, a 1A, 1B thing, that have more upside than Eckler does. How about his replacement? Let's draft a guy who's going to be in that run-heavy offense, who they personally selected to be the next Austin Eckler. I'm talking about Kimani Vidal. Now, it's interesting because if you watch our videos, we are all over Gus Edwards. He's almost a shoo-in, I think I can say this pretty safely, to score a lot of touchdowns. Let's just put double digits out there on him because that's what he does, all right? He's going to get a ton of touches. Vidal can also be successful in fantasy, and he's going to do what Gus Edwards doesn't, catch passes. He's probably going to catch a lot of passes. Think maybe not quite peak Austin Eckler, but this guy's going to be very involved because let's also keep in mind that when Eckler was with the Chargers, he touched the ball a ton. And now we're going to the most run-heavy offense possible with Greg Roman, who in 10 years as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, never has he had an offense that wasn't in the top 10 in rush attempts. And only once did he manage an offense that wasn't top 5 in overall rushing yards? Yeah, there will be plenty to go around for both these running backs. Whoever they put in the backfield, Vidal is a guy who's almost an Eckler clone here. Eckler, about 5'9", 200 pounds these days. Vidal is 5'8", 213. Maybe younger, faster, stronger version of Eckler. Well, look, he doesn't have to be Austin Eckler, but I'm definitely drafting him instead of Austin Eckler. All right, let's get back to the receiver position. Got some more big play makers here. One that you prefer definitely over the other.
Yes, I still don't understand why Gabe Davis is even being drafted. Like this guy, I mean, this guy hasn't been relevant for years, really. I mean, every year people are like, oh, this is it, Gabe Davis. Yeah, Gabe Davis. And then you get like 3 games where he goes off, and the rest of the time he's not just bad, he's like legitimately hurting your fantasy team. And the other ironic thing here is the weeks you finally say, okay, fine, I'm done with this guy, I'm benching him, then he goes off on your bench. So you don't even get those big spike weeks. But now look at Gabe Davis. He's in a worse situation. He's going from Josh Allen, one of the best QBs in the NFL, to Trevor Lawrence. And look, maybe Trevor Lawrence gets better, but are we really going to say he's going to be on Josh Allen's level? Not only that, he's going from the clear number 2 wide receiver behind Stephon Diggs to maybe at best the number 3 target here behind Christian Kirk and rookie Brian Thomas, but maybe really the number 4 target because they use Evan Ingram almost like a wide receiver. This guy is going to get 100+ targets. Gabe Davis is just going to be out there doing his thing, being the X receiver, not being able to get any separation, running go routes, and doing nothing in real life or for your fantasy team. So stop drafting this guy and instead just gamble on a guy like Jahan Dotson. I know Jahan Dotson was terrible last year. He definitely did not make a year 2 leap, but he was good as a rookie, and I still think he's a good player. I think he can, make that leap maybe in year 3, and he's actually getting a QB upgrade with rookie Jaden Daniels. Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, say whatever you want about what you think about Kingsbury, the head coach. He is a good offensive mind. He's a good offensive coordinator. This offense will be a fantasy-friendly offense. We saw it in Arizona, a very fantasy-friendly offense. And Jahan Dotson being drafted for some reason after Gabe Davis. I don't know why, other than I guess Jahan Dotson was so bad last year, but wasn't Gabe Davis even worse, or maybe not worse, but just as bad? So give me Jahan Dotson, the number 2 wide receiver in Washington with a real QB upgrade over Gabe Davis, who might not even be the number 3 target on his own team with a QB downgrade.
And before you say that we're just hating on all these veteran players, I'm going to throw out a second-year receiver. I know we talk a lot about second-year breakouts, guys ready to step up, even if they had disappointing rookie seasons. I really think Quentin Johnson takes a step down. Almost seems hard to fathom because how can you go backwards any farther than you're already at rock bottom? And this isn't just me. Look, we talk about his reception, perception profile. Matt Harmon's great website breaks down how effective receivers are. If you look at QJ's chart, he basically looks like the worst receiver in the history of football. If you watched him play, in person or watched any of the games on TV, then that sounds about right. Because he was horrible. Let's just face it. Absolutely horrible. And this doesn't seem like it's going to all of a sudden magically cure itself. It wasn't the quarterback situation. It wasn't the coaching staff. He just legit was not ready for the NFL. I don't see that changing. I'm sorry. I'm not taking the discount here. I'm not hoping for a breakout. I'm just not wasting a draft pick on Quentin Johnson because I would rather have the guy who is in that same offense that is going to get the targets and has actually done something with them, and that's Josh Palmer. Look, I don't think Josh Palmer is a special receiver, but I think he might wind up being the number 1 receiver for the Chargers. I know they drafted Ladd McConkey because they needed a replacement for Quentin Johnson to replace the disappointment of his first-round pick from a year ago. Look, McConkey will see a lot of targets, right? I think that he will be fine, but he's a slot guy, right? He's not necessarily a downfield threat, a big playmaker. I don't know if he'll be used in the red zone. I think Josh Palmer is going to continue to be that vertical threat because that's mainly what he does, right? That's his game. And so I see more big plays from him. And just the fact that he's going to be one of the top receivers for that Chargers offense, yeah, I know they're going to run it a ton. They're still going to pass it sometimes too. They still have a pretty good quarterback there with Justin Herbert. According to projections from Fantasy Life, Josh Palmer is one of only 4 receivers that is projected currently to get over 100 targets, but he's being drafted outside the top 50 receivers. Okay, so this screams value. So whereas Quentin Johnson just screams bust again, Palmer to me might be one of those sneaky late round picks that actually pays off. Well, it's no secret, those are some players we are avoiding in our drafts and some of their smart replacements. How about each and every round, the player that you should be targeting? These guys are definitely going to be relevant.